Strength and hypertrophy are often thrown together in the same boat, and while they are closely related and can even affect one another, they aren't the same thing. And they can benefit from different approaches to program design, which is what we're going to discuss today. I'm Annie Miller, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, and I help you learn as you train and create long-term programming and periodization with more efficiency and confidence as a coach. If you want to be sure that you're programming for the right stimulus, strength, or hypertrophy, or a bit of both, today's video is going to be for you. I was going to title this video Sets and Reps for Strength versus Hypertrophy, but I want to cover more aspects of training than just volume. Today we'll look at the following factors and what the best prescription may be for strength versus hypertrophy: exercise order and exercise selection, sets and reps, training splits, and exercise pairings. In order to know how to program for these goals, you first need to understand the goal and the adaptation that you are attempting to reach through this programming. First up is defining hypertrophy versus strength. So hypertrophy is one piece of the potential for strength, so let's go ahead and start there. Hypertrophy is the adaptation of muscle growth, more specifically an increase in size in individual muscle fibers. The adaptation is largely driven by tension we place on the muscle and how we progress that muscular demand over time. For strength has more demands than hypertrophy. And that's actually one of the biggest reasons that I decided to focus on hypertrophy versus strength in my postpartum period in between my babies. During that postpartum and being pregnant again season, hypertrophy training was a lower barrier to entry for me personally. The goal was to put on and maintain as much muscle as I could. Strength played a piece in that, but true strength training can have a much higher mental and neural load than hypertrophy training. The factors driving an increase in strength are the actual skill, proficient neural pathways from brain to muscle, resulting in quality or shitty technique. I will add in the mental load, which is not necessarily a driver of muscle performance. There is a mental load and preparation that comes with training for strength. You need to be in the right headspace to step under a heavy barbell or pull it off the floor week after week. Lastly is muscle mass, aka hypertrophy. More muscle equals more potential for strength output. Where hypertrophy is simply a measurement of muscle size, strength measures the force output of that muscle. In training, that is demonstrated through particular exercises. You can train isolated quad strength in an exercise like quad extensions, or you can test and train its knee extension performance in a compound exercise like the back squat or the front squat. Now let's go ahead and talk about training factors that drive hypertrophy versus strength and how to apply them. If you need help setting up that overall structure of a program, from training splits to exercise order and so on, check out my video on how to write a training program. First up is exercise order. Strength is dependent on a fresh nervous system and muscular system, so putting the most demanding exercises first is key in program design. You'll have some prep work, and I call this movement prep. Its purpose is to prep joints and muscles being worked for the day. Then the main strength work or exercises, and exercises from there on out become more isolated and perhaps slightly less demanding than the main lift, but challenging nonetheless. Hypertrophy exercise order could look many different ways. It could very much so mimic the strength order that I just shared, or start out the gate with supersets, and you could do 4 supersets for a given muscle group for that day. Generally, you would still work from most compound or demanding from a muscular and neural standpoint to the less demanding, i.e. shoulder press will not likely be at the end of your workout either way, but lateral raises may be in both scenarios for strength and hypertrophy at the end of a lift. That takes us to potential exercise selection biases for hypertrophy program design versus strength. No exercise is bad or good, but some exercises make sense for a given goal, while others make the most sense for a different goal. There is a reason that you see bodybuilders train more isolated exercises and power and strength athletes train larger compound movements. Those exercises tend to give the athletes the best results for their desired goals. So take note, because that last little fact should drive your program design decisions. Can back squats be in a hypertrophy and a strength-based program? Yes, but the sets and reps may be slightly different. They might be supersetted with another exercise in a hypertrophy bias program, or followed by more isolated work. In a hypertrophy-based program, it makes sense to play with the following, which is pre-fatigue, so doing quad extensions before your squat squat sets to add more stress and tension to the prime mover, in this case the quads. You can also play with back off sets, so finishing the sets with a close to failure set in order to cause as much tension and fatigue as possible to the working muscles. Whereas with strength, you might just perform the back squats at a high percentage, low rep, and then move on to another exercise that supports the neural adaptations of a squatting pattern, like a split squat or a step up. Back squats are used in both, but with very different purposes. One is driving tension and fatigue on the hypertrophy side. The other is driving force and movement pattern on the strength side. In general, compound movements favor strength output due to multiple muscle groups working together at the same time. Because more than one muscle group is called upon, higher force output can be expressed. You can certainly push strength within a specific isolated movement, but these do tend to favor hypertrophy because you can stress one muscle from many different angles and ranges. For example, a strength program for overhead pressing might choose the following exercise: strict press, heavy bent over row, landmine press, and lateral raise or some tricep work. The focus is movements that work and support vertical pressing patterns and the surrounding muscle groups. Whereas a hypertrophy focused program is going to focus on destroying the delts, anterior, lateral, and posterior. They might overhead press, but it could be a single arm dumbbell variation that is paired with lateral raises, then go into Arnold presses or incline dumbbell press, bent over row, reverse flies. Other lateral raise variations, you could do supported Y raises, incline and lying lateral raise, etc. Can isolation exercises help fill gaps in strength? Yes, but it's not the main driver. So do the same set and rep schemes apply to or result in strength and hypertrophy? Per usual, it depends, but there are some clear differences. Let us discuss. Sets and reps. If you take anything away from this section, it is this. Look at this diagram. This is taken directly from my peer programming course, which is linked below. Hypertrophy as an adaptation can happen across a much larger range of sets and reps than strength can. Strength exists on a tighter spectrum than hypertrophy. Whether doing isolation work or compound movements, strength is going to be trained at a lower volume, so think under 6 reps, but remember that hypertrophy is an aspect of strength. So does it make sense to program lateral raises at 3x5 for a strength program? No, that is a terrible use of that exercise selection, which takes us back to that idea that every exercise does not best fit every training adaptation or demand. It makes more sense to use a lateral raise with higher rep ranges, think 8 to 15. Still fine for strength-focused program, but used in the accessory work after the strength work is completed. I only say this because sets and reps will somewhat depend on exercise selection as well. Let's start with strength sets and reps because they are more confined to a range than hypertrophy is. So strength reps. Remember, strength is the measurement of force output. Generally, strength reps range 1 to 6 and are over 80% of your 1RM. You can do as many sets of this as you like, but adequate rest between those sets will be needed to have a continuous high output of force without fatigue in your strength training. I hope you can see why large compound movements often make the most sense for building strength, and it's why you see squat, hinge, pushing, pulling all trained in strength programs. Now let's look at hypertrophy reps. Hypertrophy does not care about sets and reps, but favors tension. As long as you are accumulating a lot of time under tension and high mechanical tension, taking the muscle to near failure, you can maximize muscle growth. For the sake of providing a range, I would say 6 to 15 plus reps and working on RPE, rate of perceived exertion, or reps in reserve RIR versus working on percentages. I want to jump back to exercises before we dive into training splits. But first, would you say your current training is more hypertrophy based or strength based? Or if you're training clients, do most of them want strength or hypertrophy or something entirely different and you're just watching this video for program design ideas? Let me know in the comments below. Let's go over exercise pairings. For strength work, you may not see many supersets, but they can certainly be efficient for time's sake. Perhaps it makes the most sense to perform single exercises at challenging loads with ample rest in between sets. For hypertrophy specific training, supersets are commonly used to either fatigue one muscle group or fatigue agonists and antagonists, i.e. chest and upper back, or bis and tris. If looking to fatigue one muscle group, you might pair a compound movement with an isolation movement, like lateral raise and shoulder press, or hip thrusts and lateral band walks. These can be seen, again, in strength program design as well. I'd simply say that hypertrophy bias programming favors supersets and trisets as the goal is muscular fatigue. With all of this, how many days are you training a given muscle group for strength or hypertrophy, and does it even matter? Let's move on to training splits. For both strength and hypertrophy specific training, some kind of upper-lower split may be best. Remember that strength is a skill. It will likely benefit someone to train these patterns more than once per week. That's where an undulating style of program design might make sense. Again, we cover this inside my peer programming course in depth. I wouldn't stress too much over the training split that you're using. If you focus on one thing, hit a muscle group or pattern twice per week. This will give you the best bang for your buck for either strength or hypertrophy focused programming. And this allows adequate time between lifts for recovery of said muscle group or pattern and the neural load that comes with strength training. There is a lot to consider in program design. Many factors lead to the desired outcomes that we have for ourselves or our clients. If today's video was helpful in any way, please do subscribe to the channel and give this a thumbs up. I hope you enjoyed these educated gains, and I will catch you in the next one.